get in a great habit of not only just looking at the numbers, but what is the story behind the numbers? If I was to say have a narrative around this, what did it mean? And it'll help you uncover what your priorities are. Something that's not working, like I spent so much money on this, but I don't know if it's really working. You're kind of already gut checking and doing like an audit, if you will.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. This podcast is for PhDs and PhDs to be who want to explore the hidden curriculum of finances to learn the best practices for money management, career advancement, and advocacy for yourself and others. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts, a financial educator specializing in early career PhDs and founder of Personal Finance for PhDs. This is Season 18, Episode 1, and today my guest is Dr. Marquicia Pierce, who holds a PhD in molecular physiology and biophysics from Vanderbilt University and an MBA from Northwood University. In the 10 years since finishing her PhD, Marquicia has worked in various capacities to foster life science startups and small businesses, and she is now the owner and principal consultant for Ruby Leaf Media, a science communication company for people who want to turn their tech story into a business story. Marquicia recounts the courses and projects she pursued during graduate school that set her up for her post-PhD career, and how she balanced her advisor and committee's expectations with her career ambitions. She also details the multitude of government, academic, and private sector resources that are available to founders and inventors, and the skills and mindsets that a PhD can bring to entrepreneurship. I'm looking for a couple more interviewees to round out Season 18 of this podcast. If it's been in the back of your mind to do so, this is your official invitation to please volunteer to be interviewed. I love that on this podcast, I get to feature PhDs and PhDs to be who are almost exclusively regular people and learn and share their real-life stories and strategies. Please go to pfforphds.com/podcast volunteer and fill out the quick form, and I'll be in touch over email. I look forward to interviewing you in the coming months. You can find the show notes for this episode at pfforphds.com/S18E1. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Marquicia Pierce of Ruby Leaf Media. I am delighted to have joining me on the podcast today, Dr. Marquicia Pierce of Ruby Leaf Media. She's the owner there, and Ruby Leaf Media, as she described to me, is a science communication company for people who want to turn their tech story into a business story. And just in our pre-interview chat that Marquicia and I had, it was so fascinating to hear about her career journey. I know you're going to get a lot from this as well. So Marquicia, welcome to the podcast. Would you please introduce yourself and your company for our listeners?
Thank you so much, Emily, for having me. This is such a great opportunity just to sit down and chat with you. You've been providing such great, valuable resources for a lot of my colleagues, so I appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Dr. Marquicia Pierce. I am a life scientist by training. My training was in molecular physiology and biophysics, and ever since my time in the lab, I found that I really enjoyed being able to take those concepts from the lab and bring them out to the community. So as we'll get into some of the context here, my background includes being a military brat who knows that community can be made, and you have an obligation to bring something to that community. And so I've just been able to do that for a lot of different high tech companies that are started by PhDs, and they're trying to cross over from the lab to bringing value to their community, wherever that is.
And this is going to be a really fascinating interview on just all the opportunities there are in front of graduate students and PhDs for doing just that, for advancing their careers and translating their work. And this is going to be amazing. But I want to hear more about your kind of personal journey as well. So going back to graduate school, can you tell us a little bit about like the things you did that were above and beyond just your basic, research as a graduate student, that were like side hustles or like extra projects that you did, just experience that you gained that helped you along in your career path?
Absolutely. I love this question. So I did my PhD at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And during that time, I knew two things for certain. I knew I wanted to incorporate some type of business into what I was studying. At the time, I was looking at how vitamin C moves in the brain on a molecular level. We were looking at different proteins that made that possible. If there were any phenotypes or if there's any characteristics when you didn't have these nutrition in your diet. And I love that I could connect that to and translate that to my family. Like, hey, if you don't eat these particular nutrition, these things might happen. I remember very specifically, my grandmother had major symptoms of diabetes during the time that I was getting my graduate program completed. And I distinctly remember one day thinking through, I know down to the molecular level what's happening with her symptoms and her disease progression, what will happen, but I feel so useless and helpless because I don't know if there's a particular innovation or something that could help. And that I think that kind of solidified for me that there has to be a way to take what we're learning and translate it. Many people have done that, but that's when it clicked for me. And so I knew I wanted to incorporate business. I wanted to get an MBA, but at the time there wasn't really a great place to insert that into my program. So I ended up auditing a lot of engineering management courses in the undergrad engineering school, and being able to work with them on their marketing, their tech management courses. I was able to be involved with one of their capstone day for seniors, where they were trying to put together a research project around a particular technology. We were working with small businesses in the ecosystem. I had a fantastic mentor around that, Dr. John Bierce, who facilitated that connection. And so in the lab, we were doing what we needed to do, but I was auditing courses around that particular thing. I was involved with a tech venture challenge where we were tasked with, we being other students from the medical school, the graduate school, the law school, the business school. We were all trying to get behind a particular Vanderbilt or small business in Nashville invention and make a case for this could be a business that could be sustainable and provide value to the community. Those are things that I think were pivotal to add on. You always want to have science plus something that you enjoy, and also like creative graphic design types of things. So I was in a lot of those art, science classes as well. But yeah, definitely had a lot of projects while I was getting my PhD that helped spark that fodder, if you will, for, what do I do after I get my PhD?
And in your, outside of just your own personal experience in graduate school, can you think of other like types of opportunities that graduate students might encounter that would provide similar benefits?
Sure. So a lot of the student competitions are a great place to start if you just want to dip your foot in. How do I work with other interdisciplinary teams, law students, business students on a project? These could be anything from a hackathon to which you spend a weekend trying to figure out a business proposal, to auditing a course that even though they're undergraduates, that's a great opportunity to kind of bring in some of those concepts that are complementary to your PhD. We had a academic alliance that was between Vanderbilt and the entrepreneur community as a whole. That it was called Life Science Tennessee Academic Alliance, where you could get involved as a mentor, or you can bring in speakers to your class. You could host this tech venture challenge. Those are great opportunities if you just want to see if that opportunity is for you. A lot of times now, that was 10 years ago, I'm seeing a lot more fellowships or courses that you can take while you're doing your PhD that will incorporate, hey, here's a small business proposal, a market research project. And in Michigan, there is a group called My Lead. It is graduate students, postdoc students that do just that. They work as a small boutique consulting agency where they put together a market research plan. They dig into the details and the data, both on the science side and the business side, and are able to work with other companies in that way. So those smaller projects, 3 to 6 months or a semester long, is a great way to kind of get your feet wet with that.
I'm wondering, did you encounter any cultural in terms of the field that you're in, the life sciences, any pushback to you participating in these outside of the lab activities? I've just noticed that the life sciences among the STEM fields would probably be the most resistant to those kinds of things. But it sounds like Vanderbilt itself was pretty well set up to facilitate this. So I'm just wondering what your observations were around that sort of like culture of, do we engage with business? Do we engage with startups, like from, the research side of things?
That's a great question. So I know that there were parts of the community that really was open to, there's opportunities to kind of engage in these particular ways. We very often had that same conversation, like how much do I say? I don't want to necessarily have an update about this in my committee meeting. It could very well, in that particular case, be seen as a distraction. You're here for getting your graduate studies done. You stay in the lab, especially if things aren't working. It's very hard to justify. Yeah, well, I won't be able to work on it. I'm trying to do this particular class. I think that's why auditing the class was really helpful. And the way Vanderbilt was set up, it was their IGP, or the interdisciplinary program, was very used to these different departments had courses that was attached to it that we were, depending on our specific route, able to go to. And so there was a little bit more set up for, if you want to audit a class, we could help that. But I still had to get permission through the graduate school to audit an undergrad class. And that included a conversation with my PI and my director of graduate studies, who very at the beginning, very naively, I said, hey, I think I would like to get my MBA. They were really open to, that's a great thought in theory, but not necessarily having a pathway forward to that happen. But yeah, it was very much, I felt like I'm living two lives. And if you're going over to the dark side of consulting or industry or management, investment banking, something that included that, it was kind of, you have to be very careful and tactful of how you were able to explain that, this is a class that I'm taking. It will be over at this particular time. For one of the projects, as an intern, I had to say, well, I would be willing to take a pay decrease because I'm not putting in the same amount of hours per week. So there were, and whether or not that's discouraged or encouraged, especially if you're going on year six of your PhD, those can be very awkward conversations, to say the least.
Well, thank you so much for sharing kind of your experience in that area. I hope it's encouraging to people who are facing similar like questions of, it's worth pushing it through. It's worth having these conversations. Maybe you don't need to tell them everything that's going, tell them what they need to know, but get your work done, and still, because these extra quote unquote experiences are the ones that are the most valuable for your career. I would say. We'll see in your own story how this develops. So can you say anything more about the resources that are available for, let's say, graduate students or postdocs or people who are still associated with academia who want to start a business, how academia can be set up to help them do that? And what are like the pros and cons of accessing those resources?
That's a really good question. If you are in academia, you do have a lot of resources that, say, if you were not and you were trying to get something into the marketplace on your own, that you might not be aware of. So first of all, if you're a student or a faculty member, the things that you would want to be on the lookout for is if there are any connections you have with your tech transfer office, because first and foremost, you've probably signed some contract or you have something spelled out with your place of employment that any intellectual property or even idea or anything that you work on is owned by the university, point blank, period. So the process for being able to, if it's connected with your research, bring that into a business, they have a process for doing that. They usually, the tech transfer office will facilitate. it includes, hey, I have this idea. It's just here, I'm disclosing it to you. I haven't formed a company. I have this idea. It's outside of my research scope. What information or what types of resources do you have for this particular setup? At Michigan State University, where I did my postdoc, there was actually a research foundation that helped if you were a student, a faculty member, or even a staff person that was or alumni that was affiliated with the university, and you want to start a company, they were there for you to provide resources like entrepreneur in residence, who would be a person who's gone through that process. They will help you build out a business plan, build out your value proposition, which basically says, how do I make a business that creates value for other people? How do I monetize it and sustain it? There will also be your guide for, here's some state resources, here's some academic resources in terms of money to fund either other students, undergraduates, or postdocs that can help you work through this idea. And they will actually be the work in tandem with the tech transfer office to say, hey, this is related. This could be something that we would need the university to continue to help fund the research for. Think medical devices, therapeutics, things that it takes a university and maybe a team to research. They work together. Anything that has to do with clinical trials, you would have to use a village that EIR or the entrepreneur residence can help guide you through. So there's academic resources, so tech transfer office, student entrepreneurship groups. I've had a lot of students that I've worked with that are working with a family company. They've been able to go through with their student business groups, the business schools there. They have pitch competitions that give very real money, $10,000, $20,000 sometimes, and then also connections around that. How do you get your marketing out, your packaging, your story for pitching to other investors? Hey, you have this food company. Hey, you have this idea. Who in your alumni network can help bring some insights to this? So there's resources there at the school, and then in the community, you have state resources that want to see particularly life science, high tech innovations push their economy forward. So there's grants on that particular side for if you're just in this particular region working on a high tech, high growth company, scalable company, which a lot of life science companies are, here's what we can offer to you. Here's the connections, market research, legal consultants, regulatory consultants. How do you put together a website? Those are resources that are available on that end. And then one last thing, I know I need to be brief about this. There are government particular, outside of the different accelerators for those things, there are government funding. It's called Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR, STTR grants that can, specifically if you're connected with the university, they would provide high risk financial resources to high risk innovations. Those take a little bit longer to do, and you definitely want a team to help guide you through that. But that's also money that you don't have to give up equity or parts of your company to access. Now I'll pause there.
Emily here for a brief interlude. Would you like to learn directly from me on a personal finance topic such as taxes, goal setting, investing, frugality, increasing income, or student loans, each tailored specifically for graduate students and postdocs? I offer seminars and workshops on these topics and more in a variety of formats, and I'm now booking for the 2024-2025 academic year. If you would like to bring my content to your institution, would you please recommend me as a speaker or facilitator to your university, graduate school, graduate student association, or postdoc office? My seminars are usually slated as professional development or personal wellness. Orientations, or very close to the start of the academic year, would be a perfect time for tax education or general personal finance content. Ask the potential host to go to pfforphds.com/financial-education, or simply email me at emily@pfforphds.com to start the process. I really appreciate these recommendations, which are the best way for me to start a conversation with a potential host. The paid work I do with universities and institutions enables me to keep producing this podcast and all my other free resources. Thank you in advance if you decide to issue a recommendation. Now back to our interview. Yeah, I think that you led right into kind of the next question, which is like the more, I guess, aside from technology that was developed under your employment with the university that would then be, co-owned with the university. Let's say you had an idea outside of it, not related to directly your work, the university wouldn't own it. The more kind of help you reach out for, depending on the type of help that you get, you may be giving up ownership in your idea. Is that right? Can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, maybe there's different, giving up equity is different than getting a grant, for example. Can you talk about some distinctions there?
Sure. So at the very early stage, an early stage in life sciences are, say you have a device, a medical device, you have a prototype for that device, but you haven't tested it out on humans. You haven't done a clinical trial, or you have a therapeutic that you've maybe tested it out on mice, but you haven't moved it towards seeing if it holds up in humans. Most of the time you're doing that stuff with the university, but if you aren't and you're still in that early stage, the choices that you have are you can go for grants and in-kind services. They call this non-dilutive funding, where you don't dilute your ownership. And there's regional and government funding for that. And then sometimes accelerators or venture groups will have a program in which they are developing something, or they're co-developing with you something that can fast track that time into the market. So some examples of this could be like Y Combinator, or Techstars or something, where in order to have access to this great structure that they put in, and maybe even some funds together, they would require a percentage of your company. Small, it could be anywhere between 5 to 12% of that company. The thing is, if you're in the life science space and you're that early stage and you're already giving up equity, you have a very long runway to go to where at every milestone the company gets a little bit more valuable. And if you're already giving up equity at those earlier stages, you don't have as much for the really heavy duty milestones, a clinical trial, a distributor agreement to also incorporate or leverage giving up some of your equity. So it's a very different thing for the life sciences or an academic project to kind of evaluate these options. If you're really early on, you haven't gotten a lot of the feedback or regulatory spot, you could consider yourself early. And the latest you can push off giving up a piece of your company, the better, because it'll be valuable hopefully later on, and you still have that, you'll retain that ownership.
Well, thank you so much for giving the listeners kind of a taste of that, those decisions that need to be made earlier on. It sounds like having an academic affiliation can be so helpful, because you are in many ways still considered like a learner, no matter what stage you're at. And so there's so many resources available to help you along that path. So I'm curious now about your personal journey and also the journeys you've observed in others, I believe you mentioned earlier that you started your company sort of around the time that you finished graduate school. You've also had a lot of other positions along the way that have, added to your career. And so I'm wondering, for you as an entrepreneur and someone who works with entrepreneurs, what kinds of skill sets, maybe mindsets, are common between PhDs and people who start and run businesses? Like what did we learn in the PhD that's helpful for later entrepreneurship? Those kinds of things. And that could be from your personal experience or the people you've known.
Sure, I'll start with my personal experience. So the very first time I was introduced to, like, we have to set up a company around this technology was during my postdoc. So after I left Vanderbilt, I went to Michigan State University under a industrial postdoc position, where the goal was I was working with two academic tenure track professors trying to get a company up and going and started. And so the skill set that I brought to the table and that I was trying to hone was interesting, because I was while I was getting my PhD, I was also getting my MBA. So I was learning what were some of the frameworks that business people use, how do they talk about how they use a process, and then how does that work in the lab, or how do I need to translate that from what we were doing in the lab? And so I would also often go back to the framework for problem solving and great communication were very much similar. They just were talking about different things. So I'll explain. So in the lab, I'm working through, okay, is this small molecule useful? We do a battery of tests to distinguish why based off a couple of characteristics. It might be this one is it works well with cells, it's less toxic, and it's easy to make. I'm being arbitrary. The way I would translate that story, going through my MBA type of framework would be, well, what value are we creating, and specifically, who is it for? So the molecule, these features that we have that we were very we're trying to point out and be distinct about. Now I have to turn them into benefits. Well, it's this type of molecule that means that it's less toxic. What does that mean to our business story? The people who would use it, the physicians, or even the patient themselves. Well, that means that if we can keep it within the cell, it's not messing around with your gut and causing you nauseous or killing other healthy cells. That means that you could take less of it, and that means for the physicians, they might adhere to the drug cadence a little bit better. For the patient, it means that I'm not getting upset stomachs as often. I don't have to get as many injections. Those are the types of communication skills where you're working through the same rigorous process, but you're just trying to communicate it in a little bit different way, that you see when you're filling out that story as a PhD. Well, I'm doing this study. Who's my audience, or who's my audience? Usually it's your community members, right? So they want to see what happened, what are you doing next, and then what can we help you with? Same thing with a VC or a grant writer. You have to say, what was the background in their particular words? What are you working on? What's the value that you're creating? And then where can we go from next? What's the big milestone? So you're able to think through a structure that's very similar. It just needs to be translated a little bit different. But being able to communicate that is a strength. Being able to work with multiple teams that are very bright people, but they don't we're in the same lab and the same methods and tools that you work with. You need to be able to talk their language. You have to do that in the business world as well. And the scientists and engineers who were able to cross that gap were the ones and coachable for doing that, understanding that, okay, this is a different language. You can apply the practice of it, but you have to say it in a certain way. The ones that are open to learning that, those are the ones that can convince other people that this is something of value. Get on our team, give us funding, give us resources that helps them to move that tech forward.
Oh, it's fascinating. Thank you so much. Was there anything else you wanted to add on that question about skills or mindsets that transfer?
The only other thing is that usually when I talk about my PhD and I hear other people's story, it comes off very linearly. We can only say one thing at a time. We did this, and then we did this, and then we did this. But in reality, your skill set that you're picking up with these different experiences, they aren't a straight line. They look more like a Gantt chart. It's like I was trying this, and then I got into graphic design by being the newspaper editor for the department or something like this. And then I kind of wanted to see what policy was doing, so I volunteered a semester at this. And you don't really know if they overlap or if it will lead to that big next step, if you will. But that's okay. That's what makes the journey yours, is how you find out what you resonate with, and the skills that you learn in these offset projects or offshoot products or something that I was just interested in. Those are the ones that when you're talking to a hiring manager or a program manager for that next big gig, those are the things that resonate with them too. So just know that it won't be a straight line. You're not going to be able to line up everything until you've kind of taken a step back and said, well, actually, that set me up really well for this. I didn't even know I liked doing this particular thing. So that's all I would say for that.
Absolutely. It's just a great encouragement to devote, I would say, a certain amount of time, a certain consistent amount of time throughout your PhD to these like outside of the lab type activities, just so you can explore yourself and explore your environment and figure out what you like. And as you said, you don't know where it's going to lead, but that's a reason to just experiment. And I certainly did this. I didn't do this as much in my earlier years of my PhD, but certainly by the last couple of years, I was more like actively reaching out and trying different things, including the things that led to personal finance for PhDs, because I wanted to figure out where I wanted to go next. And I knew I wasn't going to get there by just like keeping my head down and like staying in the lab all the time. That wasn't where I was going to be headed. So, okay. Would you please tell us a little bit more about Ruby Leaf Media and how people can get in touch with you if they would like to follow up?
Sure. So I started Ruby Leaf Media shortly, like around the time I was finishing up graduate school, because I wanted to continue doing these small projects around market research or, putting together a industry report and getting paid for it. So basically, I started Ruby Leaf Media to have that vehicle for that. And I really wanted a place to infuse some creativity. At the time, I was really interested in how can you turn something that's really technical into something that could be very beautiful and inspiring to the people that are closest to you, your family, your community. And so creativity versus just being very defensive and tactical about what you're saying. I wanted to kind of merge the two. And so being able to have my own company that worked at that intersection of storytelling that businesses usually will have to do in some shape of way was my reason for getting started. Today, I work with a lot of ecosystem partners, accelerators, academic universities or academic institutions, I should say, that are trying to instill some of these ideas and some of these concepts and just some of this creative mentor learning or peer group learning, if you will, with their portfolio companies or with their founders. And so being able to provide structure for that, either through a program or being able to give them tips on how do you pitch for a particular funding opportunity, how do you put that story together? That's what my team and myself are really interested in doing. And we're really interested in being able to do that for a lot of different providers so that you can get that group learning experience. Right now, the best way to look to figure out and see all of the different companies that I worked with is actually my LinkedIn profile.
Very good. Thank you. The last question that I ask of all my guests is what is your best financial advice for another early career PhD? And that could be something that we've touched on already in the interview, or it could be something completely new.
Um, the advice part, it kind of goes around budgeting. So graduate students, well, when I was a graduate student, we got paid once a month. And I think probably a lot of graduate students are doing this, they're doing something similar, but it really helped me get into the idea of a little bit longer term planning than 2 weeks or even 1 week. Like, what are some of the goals that we have for this particular month? I.e., what bills do we have to pay? What are we trying to get done? And it set the habit of budgeting month by month, and then being able to bring that over to my business. Budgeting is absolutely one of the. I mean, I feel like a lot of your resources kind of talk through this, but just get in a great habit of not only just looking at the numbers, but what is the story behind the numbers? Just kind of walk through. I kind of like when I go through my budget, I'm like, okay, if I was to have a narrative around this, what did it mean? And it'll help you uncover what your priorities are. Something that's not working, like I spent so much money on this, but I don't know if it's really working. You're kind of already gut checking and doing like an audit, if you will. And it's really helpful with business because like I'm paying for all these subscription services, or I'm trying to get this marketing campaign off the ground. I think it'll be done with this quarter, but I'm already 15% into the budget. Did we do what we needed? Just kind of talk it out. just have a narrative around your finances, and just say it out loud will help you uncover, what's working, what's not working, what are some of your plans. Like if you find yourself saying things over and over, it's like, I keep saying this. That's been helpful for me.
I don't think I've ever heard that suggestion before. Like not only within the podcast, but like in all the personal finance, material that I read. I don't think I've ever heard someone say, in the budgeting reflection process, to tell yourself a story and to create a narrative around how did this period of time go? Did I accomplish what I wanted to accomplish? And I find that to be such a good suggestion. And I think I'm going to start doing this because it feels very like non-judgmental. Like it's just, this is how things went. I'm going to review that. I'm going to tell myself the story of it. And next month I have the chance to start over again and make a different story next month if I want to, or tell the same one if I thought it went really well. And so, yeah, that's so creative. And obviously it plays back into this whole interview that we've had and the importance of communication and what you do now. So like, it shouldn't surprise me that this advice, came from you in particular, but I think that was really amazing. Thank you so much. Marquicia, this has been such a fascinating interview. Thank you so much for volunteering to come on the podcast and to share kind of all of these wonderful, experiences you've had and the resources you've been able to tap into, and just suggestions for other people who want to go on a similar path. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate what you're doing. And this is great. I wish I had been listening to your podcast when I was a grad student.
Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. I have a gift for you. You know that final question I ask of all my guests regarding their best financial advice? I have collected short summaries of all the answers ever given on the podcast into a document that is updated with each new episode release. You can gain access to it by registering for my mailing list at pfforphds.com/advice. Would you like to access transcripts or videos of each episode? I link the show notes for each episode from pfforphds.com/podcast. See you in the next episode, and remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing by Dr. Lourdes Bobbio and show notes creation by Dr. Jill Hoffman.